The team at Intrepid Studios is building a massive, beautiful world with Ashes of Creation, a world that players I think will naturally want to explore. Ashes is an MMO that is taking the best parts of many previous MMOs with their own twist being the node system. This is the main feature of Ashes of Creation and the feature that sets Ashes apart from prior MMOs. If the node system did not exist, Ashes would be very similar to ArcAge, which is perhaps the game that Ashes is most inspired by. In ArcAge, players as they leveled would progress to zones with higher and higher mob levels, a pretty standard linear progression path, which is standard for most MMOs. Ashes of Creation zones do not follow that traditional go from the 1 to 10 zone, then go to the 10 to 20 zone, then go to the 20 to 30 zone linear path. Instead, mob levels will vary throughout the zone and scale in difficulty as the node levels. Here's the exact quote from Steven on this. "We don't have a strictly level 25 zone. Instead, that zone might have some level 10 creatures near the road, some level 20 creatures deep in the forest, and some level 30 creatures at the mountain. These ratios will change based on the nodes that inform them, becoming generally more dangerous as the node grows. All this civilization attracts the attention of things that should not be. This does not mean that wilderness areas are safe by any means. Some may be safer, but all will have dangers that even the most experienced traveler needs to watch for." When I hear this, I naturally think that the optimal route to leveling your character could be to stay in one place and level a node, unlocking new content that can then be used to further level your character. Now, I know there is a constant debate between those that play optimally and those that do not want to play optimally. I lean towards optimal play personally and find that enjoyable. In my view is that players should be able to play the game in whatever manner they find enjoyable. I have talked about this in the past, and I will probably talk about this more in the future videos, but that is not the point of this video. The main point of this video is that I hope Intrepid can find the right balance between encouraging players getting out and exploring the world versus staying in one spot primarily and leveling their node. Steven has gone on record saying that staying in one spot will not be the optimal path to attaining player experience. Here's the quote from Steven talking about that.
Will each node have a couple or have a complete and unique path for a player to get to max level? So this is like, could I just go to one node and level up to max level?
Could you do that? The way that the nodes influence spawners around its area, if the node were high enough level, it would have relevant experience grants that you could likely just live your life at a particular node. However, that probably would not be the most effective means of leveling. Is it possible? Perhaps, yes. But it would be probably at a reduced pace.
So what they're going for is making the optimal route to not stay at one node primarily and level in one spot. But I still wonder how well that will play out once we actually start to play the game. My only experience with Ashes is Alpha 1, and it was not the most optimal route to stay in one spot and in one node to level. There was a main story quest that gave huge XP and rewards, and that was a huge part of leveling the fastest. And sprinkled throughout the map were a few quests and quest chains that gave huge XP awards. But Alpha 1 was very minimal in terms of features. In Alpha 2, especially later in Alpha 2, when most of the features come online, we will see a much better representation of how this might play out. So next I would like to talk about the systems that might cause a player to want to explore versus the systems that might cause a player to want to stick to a certain node. From there, we can only speculate as to how the balance will work out. First, here are the things that might coerce a player to explore. Resource scarcity and abundance being region specific is a huge thing. Crafters make the best gear in the game, but it is going to take a huge amount of materials, some of which will be very hard to find in whatever area a player makes their home node. Gatherers will have to travel potentially very long distances to get certain materials, then transport them back with the caravan system. And it is not just crafters that will need these materials, but also node buildings that are being developed will be a huge material sink. So those that focus on gathering will likely be drawn to exploring much more than those that focus on processing and crafting will. And you can only become a master in either gathering, processing, or crafting, so that choice will have a big effect on what becomes optimal for you. It is important to note that players gain experience from many different sources in Ashes of Creation, not just mob kills and quests. Gathering, processing, and crafting also give experience. exploration, events, and PvP give experience. So that is also a consideration to remember. It might be viable for crafters to stay in one area and craft their way to 50 without leaving their home node very often. Gatherers might be incentivized to explore. After material gathering, what is the next thing that will encourage exploration? Well, like I mentioned with the main story quest, or what they are calling story arcs, this could be a big pull to get people to explore if the quests naturally take you all over the map to complete these story quests, and if the rewards are large enough to offset the travel time to get to these areas. Again, the map is huge, as I have mentioned in my map video, and possibly getting larger still, so the XP gain would need to account for the massive travel time to get to these quest locations. Another thing that I think people are sleeping on, that I think could be a huge draw to get people out and exploring the world, is hunting certificates. Hunting certificates are the replacement for gold dropping with mob kills. Instead, certificates drop that can be traded in at hunter NPCs at nodes. The key is the gold value that you get in return will vary based on how far from the node the certificates were acquired and the amount of certificates of that type that are being turned in at that node. So exploring farther away from your node to farm mobs and then returning later will be rewarded. Early after launch on a server, this could be a quick way to get the gold for a house before the housing prices rise and more people become citizens of the node. Later, once the caravan system comes online at node stage 3, players might opt to use that to get more value out of their hunting certificates, but again, that will still require players to actively escort the caravan, thereby driving exploration. So I think hunting certificates are a huge potential draw to get people exploring, not just distance, but also looking for mob spots that are not heavily farmed because of quests or other reasons, as those will drop more valuable certificates. Outside of gathering, story quests, and hunting certificates, I do struggle a bit to find more things that might naturally pull a player from their home node. Other quests for freehold development, social and religious organizations that one obtains from node citizenship could require players to travel far away from their home node, and I could see this being necessary to achieve the balance needed to pull people out into the world more, especially for processors and gatherers. But we don't know anything about the questing for these systems yet. Another potential pull could be world bosses having specific drops that crafters need to make certain gear. This could be more of a late game thing, but I think it might also be something that is needed to get past a certain stage of crafting, which again would encourage more exploration. You might need a certain thing that only drops from one specific world boss to level past 150 armor smithing, for instance. Now, the issue with this is the current plan is for there to be very little BOE and BOP items and materials, so a crafter could just buy the items needed and never go to that location and kill the boss, which is great in terms of having a vibrant economy, but it would potentially mean players that become crafters could more optimally level by staying in one node and focusing on crafting and buying the materials from the explorers, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but is something that Intrepid will have to consider balancing to some extent. So these are all things that could pull a player out exploring the world, but what are some things that could keep a player in one area more? Well, crafting and processing, as I have already mentioned, are a big thing that could keep a player in their home node the most. There will absolutely be a rush to attain citizenship and housing in whatever node is the largest near their starting area, because citizens will get much more access to the higher tier node crafting and processing stations. And freeholds will be very sought after by processors, as freeholds are the places where the best processing stations will be built. So nodes, we know, will primarily, if not solely, be developed by doing activities in the ZOI of the node. Maybe there will be a few quests that are done outside the node ZOI that will also give node XP, but for the most part, players are going to level nodes by doing things in the node ZOI. So for a crafter to get access to the higher tier crafting stations, they will be encouraged to stay in that area and quest, craft, etc. Processors will be encouraged to try to obtain a freehold and improve it. How much of that will require leaving the node, we don't know, but it might be a safe assumption to assume that might also be something that is more of a local activity versus a regional or global activity. So crafting and processing, I think, might be more of a node activity versus an exploration activity. What else is there? Well, nodes, as they level, unlock new progression paths such as social organizations and religions, Once unlocked, how much the questing and progression in these will take people out into the world versus staying in their home node is also not known. But there might need to be some quests from these that force players to travel to encourage more exploration and help with balancing out the temptation to stay in one place too much. Because of the massive size of the world map, if a player can consistently get, say, 5,000 XP per hour in their home node with minimal movement, that might be more efficient than a player that gets much more XP per quest by traveling long distances, but the time to travel to those locations could still mean that the player gets less XP per hour on average than the node dweller does. It's a balancing act that will be interesting to watch unfold. And of course, getting a character to max level is only one consideration in Ashes. You need to level up your artisan skills, try to acquire the best housing you can and upgrade it, increase your religion and social organization reputations, improve your gear, help build your node buildings, and many other things. Getting to max level and neglecting all of these things is not going to be an optimal strategy most likely, and people need to be allowed to play the game the way they want within the framework of the design goals of the game. Those that play less optimally should not get the same amount of progression as those that do. This is not a game meant to keep casuals and hardcore players on an even level, which for many of us that are excited about this MMO, that is what we want. But it still needs to be an enjoyable experience if someone wants to be more of a city dweller or play in a less optimal way. This is something I will be watching when testing Alpha 2, how this balance plays out. If you liked this video, consider subscribing. With that, I will see you in the next video.